Welcome to part two of this interview. When we left off, you were talking about how there was a moment when you snuck into, there was a bar in LA that you snuck into, a gay bar, and everyone was like having a good time and partying, but the minute Queer as Folk came on, it got really silent. So continuing on from there, what was that experience like watching that?
Yeah, it was really wonderful. I went with Dan Littman and Ron Cowan and with a guy named Pancho Mansfield, who was our executive from Showtime, and we snuck in there. And it, first of all, it was just very thrilling. It was halfway through the first season, I think it was the episode where Ted ran into an old high school or college crush of his rather, who turned out to be a dungeon master.
Yeah.
And you may recall that episode. And so, it was a good episode for Ted.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It felt like going back, in Shakespeare's time, they had, the people they called the groundlings, who were all the audience who didn't get seats, who kind of stood up near the stage. And it was like being amongst the groundlings watching
Yeah.
the play and the amount of interaction they had with whatever was going on. They obviously took it very personally. They really felt this ownership over the show and just were having so much fun. So it was very, very exciting. And it really helped give me that feel for what the show meant to, especially gay audience at that time, but also this sense of community that it engendered was wonderful. And that happened, in gay bars all over North America. I know you up in Toronto where we shot the show, especially Woody's, which was the bar in Queer as Folk, but also the bar existed on Church Street in Toronto. And every Sunday at Woody's, people would gather and watch this thing. So the sense of community that it gave to people was very unique. There's not a lot of television shows where that happens, where entire bars full of people will get together. Maybe nowadays with the Housewives, I don't know if people gather for the Housewives shows,
I think
but
they still do because it's to my surprise, and this is not no shade as they say towards Housewives because I don't really watch the show, but it's still very popular. It resonates with people, so they might still have these watch parties. Um, but there was a reboot of Queer as Folk
Mhm.
in 2022.
Mhm.
It unfortunately was canceled after one season due to low ratings, so it didn't quite have the impact of the original series. But did you watch the series at all? And then what were your thoughts about them bringing it back?
I did not watch this series. I will admit to having a lot of sour grapes ab- about the reboot. It's something we had been trying to make happen for a number of years with especially since Peter Page, who played Emmett, has gone on to become a very successful showrunner and creator of shows like The Fosters and Good Trouble and other things. We were hoping he might be able to take over the series and do a proper reboot to continue the stories that we had been telling, 20 years ago when the show ended. Unfortunately, the reboot that was selected, essentially the author and the writer of the new reboot just bought the title.
Hmm.
And we were told very explicitly, from what I understand, that they wanted no involvement of us with it. They didn't want it to be a continuing of the stories that had already been told, and that it was going to just be its own thing.
Yeah.
And so, I can only go off of hearsay about the quality of the show. And, I do know some friend of mine who was friends with one of the actors in it. So, I mean no disrespect to any of them, but it sounds like, if you're going to do a reboot of Queer as Folk, what people loved about Queer as Folk were the folk.
Yeah.
As it,
Good point.
as Peter always used to say, they came for the queer, they stayed for the folk. And the reason our show resonated so much was because of the characters.
Yeah.
And to not include them at all, it did not surprise me. They did not get an audience to
Yeah.
come along and follow them. And it sounded like they focused so much on fixing what many felt was wrong with our version of it, which was a lack of diversity, which was the lack of, including the full rainbow in the show, which was an impossible task to do back in 2000. It was a miracle this show got on the air at all.
Yeah.
And I understand even back then, this feeling like, wow, I'm finally seeing our community truly represented on screen. I want to see everything. And
Mhm.
you just can't do that.
Right.
It's too challenging to do. Plus, we shot the show up in Toronto, which back in the early 2000s, the diversity of the community that we could pull from to act in the show was not as vast as we might have found down in the States as well, too. So I get that it's a ding against the show, and certainly something, if it could have been corrected, I'm sure it would have. But it sounds like the reboot focused more on that
Yeah.
and making sure that that diversity was more fully recognized than it did on telling stories that resonated with people like our version did. So that's on hearsay,
Yeah.
but that's a long form answer to your question.
No, it brings me to a different point because there was this sort of Sex and the City did their reboot, which was and just like that, it's recently ended after 3 seasons, but the I remember some of the early criticism that season one got was coming from a lot of black audiences who were saying that the show was trying too hard to push diversity and that it wasn't coming off authentic and that it didn't seem like a realistic way that these characters were kind of being kind of sold into the friendship, the core friendship of Carrie,
Yeah.
Miranda, and Charlotte. So to your point, like I feel like, it's okay to pursue diversity, to try to correct what you thought may be wrong with the original series, but the key word is authentic. It has to be authentic. It has to make sense. And I think,
Yeah.
to your point with this reboot series, perhaps maybe it was just throwing everything. I guess trying to make gumbo, trying to throw everything in the pot and mesh it all together, but maybe it just didn't resonate, probably.
Yeah, and audiences sense inauthenticity in those
Yeah,
kind of things, right? And you can tell when it feels like they're just checking off boxes and
yeah,
things. And because we faced some of this from within the gay community when we were on the air, just all they having sex all the time? Why are they, why can't they be more? Can't we just see them at their job and they just have a nice normal job? And it's because that's really boring, right? That's not interesting. We're creating drama here, and even within Queer as Folk, Dan and Ron, especially, it used to irk them quite a bit, and so they did create within Queer as Folk a series that everybody was watching called Gay as Blazes. I believe is what it was called. And if you go back and look, sometimes when people are watching episodes of Gay of Blazes, and it was that like just nice gay people, and you had one, someone was in a wheelchair, and someone, like everyone, like they were ticking off all these boxes really deliberately, and it was so boring,
yeah.
deliberately so. So they try to have a little bit of fun with that. Of like, look, you have a choice. You can make this interesting, or you can make it all inclusive. But
Right.
it's challenging to do all of that.
Works, right.
Yeah.
Where would you say queer as folks lands in the cultural zeitgeist? I have mentioned to you before, it was deemed risque or taboo, all of the things, but it was popular. It was number one on Showtime.
Mhm.
So many people watched it. So do you think that it helped to challenge people's ignorance and lack of knowledge when it comes to gay people and gay culture and the gay experience? Do you think the show kind of helped alleviate some of those issues?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. And I think it helped bring along, the L word wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Queer as Folk. I truly believe that if we had not been successful. And I think, well, I know just from the past experience of never mind the gay community who appreciated the show, but the reason we were their number one show on Showtime, and we were kind of their Sopranos at the time, was because at least half the audience were also straight, mostly straight women who came to the show. But many of them, talking to them over the years, have gone on and joined PFLAG, have gone on and joined HRC. They're out there in the streets. They it opened them up to a world they didn't know because of the perhaps the soap opera of the show, but it also introduced them to all the issues we were talking about as well too, and opened their eyes to the politics of how the gay community was being marginalized back then and yet again now, right? So yes, I think it absolutely did. It didn't have, it was still, because it was on cable and Showtime was not even HBO at the time, it did not have as wide an audience as the Ellen's show or Will and Grace or Modern Family after us. But I think it did a few things as far as showing people how you can portray queer characters on television, how you probably should start portraying them. Dan and Ron used to say that prior to our show, all the gay representation they show on TV, you were either a clown or a eunuch,
Yeah.
right? You were either there as kind of the sassy sidekick giving comic relief, or if you were more grounded, you could never imagine that character having sex with anybody. And I think queer as folks showed that, making them three-dimensional, including who they are as sexual beings, which is something I think the show also doesn't get enough credit for as far as, you know, using the sex on the show psychologically. In my mind, I don't think it was purely gratuitous. I
Mm.
think there was something about seeing these characters, who they were not only out of the bedroom, but in the bedroom, is a very unique quality to the show because on, most shows, like the couple starts kissing and then they cut to next morning and they're having coffee, right?
Yeah.
But in my mind, like especially going back to the first episode, if you don't see Brian and Justin meeting for the first time and having sex,
Mhm.
I don't think you get, why is this guy obsessed with this other guy
Right.
for
You
5 years,
right.
right?
You really kind of get to see that journey of the relationship of how they may have started physical, but then it turns into something else, and you see that throughout the course of the season. So I get what you're saying is sometimes when these relationships are played out on television or film, they kind of sometimes follow follow like a map or something, like a
Yeah,
road.
like a template, a very rigid template.
Exactly. You don't get to see
Yeah.
all of it. So if you include all of it, the messiness, the love, the sex, the makeups, the breakups, all that stuff, you don't really get to you can't really realize characters if you can't put yourself in their shoes. You
Yes, absolutely right. And for Ted, especially like the amount of bad sex he had on
know?
the show, it goes like you understand the guy a lot more. You know
Right.
where he's coming from. There is a psychological aspect to it. And certainly, look, there was moments of, especially at the clubs and things, there's a lot of hot guys that the camera lingers over and there's oil and sweat. And,
Yeah.
there's certainly a lot of eye candy. But I think we strive quite a lot to make sure that the sex that was shown came out of story,
Yeah.
right? And came out of some kind of character development. And that's something I don't think we get credit for. I think people view it as like, oh, it was just this naughty, naughty show. But I think it was all there for a reason. And we used to like to say, that Ellen and Will and Grace, when they came on the air and they did a lot, we said, they inched the closet door open a little bit, and then Queer as Folk just kicked the closet door off its hinges, right? It just showed you like, here's everything, and here are characters more fully three-dimensionally realized than you've ever seen. And there was no the characters I felt like were all very gray. It was not black or white. Like Brian is not just a bad guy, right? You see stuff behind him. Justin was not purely good. He had some really nasty qualities as well. Ted certainly did. As big of a heart as he could be a real shit sometimes, right? And
Yeah.
they would have these fights. And again, that's something I don't think the queer community had seen before, like letting these characters not be perfect,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the things come to an end at some point. So how did you feel when the show ended? In your mind, did you feel that the story was complete, or did you feel like, well, we still have a lot more that we can tell, a lot more story to tell?
I feel like the story they set out to tell in the pilot episode, I do feel like we finished that story because it was always about this journey. And no disrespect to Michelle and Taya, who played Melanie and Lindsay, but it was really a story of boys becoming men,
Yes.
right? Even though, Ted was in his 30s, they were still living like boys.
Yeah.
And for all those characters, it was about that arc and about that growth. Certainly for Michael, who's, like a teenager with his comic book love and things like that. But Brian as well, it's the growth they all went through. I think it came to a right end. Whether people are, I know people are not happy with the end to some of those storylines, but for that long arc of 5 years, I felt like we did end it. Now, that doesn't preclude that there's not more stories to tell afterwards of what became of them. But for that journey, yeah, I felt very satisfied, at least for my character. I felt like he was well taken care of by the writers. And I was happy to see after all the hell he'd been through for him to, learn to love himself. That was his journey the whole time to, that he didn't necessarily need somebody else to be full and complete and whole. And of course, once he realizes that, then love
Right.
of his life comes back into the picture. But he needed to learn that before he could truly love somebody else in a in
Right.
a in a whole way. Yeah.
And with you saying that character arc, and this is, I agree with you about all the characters becoming from boys to becoming men, but I absolutely see that with Ted's character. I feel like
Mm.
he ended nicely, and I liked that it wasn't like like you said in the UK version, the character dies, so it wasn't
Yes.
bad or tragic. It's like he went through. I think Ted actually went through one of the biggest arcs throughout the series because he goes through, I mean, all of them go through their different experiences, but he battles a lot of really heavy things. And he, the start of the season, he's the one that has the low self-esteem and but so he really goes through these iterations and these periods of life, and then you see that development of him hitting rock bottom and then picking himself back up. You see that character arc. So I think his story wraps up very nicely. And that's
Yeah.
good to see.
Thanks for saying that, Avery. And I think, this is one of those cases where, yeah, I was supposed to, in the British version, I died after the fourth episode. So I'm grateful for four more seasons plus. But, I think because most of the other characters, there was more of a template for them from the British version, at least for the first season of the show, or at least first couple seasons of the show. Dan and Ron had a template to kind of follow that they needed to match before they could truly branch off onto their own. And with Ted, it was anything goes. So yeah, to go from, a porn addicted accountant to, crystal meth addict to successful businessman. I mean, like the arc he went through, never mind just the learning to love himself stuff. All of that I was very, very grateful for and fortunate. And I agree. I think he went through the biggest changes of anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, what has life been like for you after Queer as Folk? You've worked, consistently since then, but did you find it easier to find work? Was it difficult or challenging? How was that experience for you?
It was a mix. It was a combination of it opened a lot of doors for me. It gave me some name recognition that got me in the doors to places and made, the job for my agents and my managers a lot easier in some ways. But there were challenges because prior to Queer as Folk and the work I had done, I was primarily a comic actor. And because of all these challenges they gave me on Queer as Folk and, awards that I got nominated for and things like that, I was now known more as this dramatic actor. And I wanted to get back to the comic stuff because that's more that's more that's more fun for me. But so what I was getting sent out on were, a lot of dramatic things. There was a lot of, gay characters coming my way and a lot of uh yeah, things that felt too similar to Ted that I didn't want to just continue that journey. So, it was a balance of trying to say yes to certain things and say no to other things. And, I know because of the show, there are things I wouldn't get seen for at all, that there still was, especially when the show first started, uh, a a bit of a backlash against, being on the show. There were commercial campaigns that I had been involved with prior to Queer as Folk that when they made more commercials of them, I was not asked back to be a part of them. So, there's pluses and minuses to it, but mostly I would say pluses, and mostly, there are a lot of gay casting directors out there, especially in Los Angeles, and who were fans of the show and who were great supporters of mine and really nurtured me. Rick Milliken was one big one who helped get me onto Bones, and I had a wonderful recurring role on the series Bones for a few years, as well as theaters back here on the East Coast as well. I really credit a lot of wonderful casting directors who happen to be gay and happen to be fans of Queer as Folk that were able to support me and and keep me going in really terrific ways.
Wonderful. Um, so let's talk about Adoptable. This is
Yes.
a comic fake documentary in which you wrote
Yeah.
and produced and starred in. It's loosely based on your search to find your birth parents. You mentioned that you are adopted. So what was the experience of like creating this show, something that you had more hands-on experience with?
Overall the greatest experience of my life. And I really wanted it to continue, not just for me, but for everybody who worked on it. We had so much fun when it got down to the actual filming. Putting it together is challenging. It was relatively, we shot it for about $60,000, an entire season of a show. And, the idiot who wrote the show, me, like wrote things like, oh, there's a parade they're going to, and there's a jet plane they're flying in and things. And then when I had to become producer of the show, I had to figure out how the hell are we going to do all of that on $60,000.
Right.
So it certainly pushed me in ways that were wonderful and showed me that it definitely takes a village to make these things happen. So that part was hard. That's where I really wanted someone to pick it up afterwards and take care of all of that for me
Yeah.
for future seasons of the show. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. But, for every single person who worked on it, we all wanted to keep going with it. But to tell a story that was very personal, very vulnerable, as much as it was fictionalized, and focused more on the awkward, awful, uncomfortable comedy of the journey I went through personally searching for my birth parents. It Yeah, it was like giving birth. I guess it's the closest I'll come to giving birth to some a creature in my life to put it out there. But the response from audiences who've seen it has been, overwhelmingly wonderful. People really love the show. And yeah, I still have hope. It's been a few years now, but I still have hope somehow we can make some more. But to finally fully have entire creative control over something was amazing. Just
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
What was that experience like for you when you did meet your birth parents in real life?
Do you know many adopted people or people who have gone through search for?
No, I don't.
Oh, yeah, it's different for everybody. I was very, very fortunate. Because I went into it with no expectations. I think there are, and over the years as I've worked for different organizations around adoptee rights and things like that, people have different needs for wanting to find their birth parents. For me, it was more just to answer some questions and mostly to find out medical history. I just got to a place in my life where I was curious about medical history. And so I had gotten from my mother a very generic form that had been filled out at the time I was adopted that had just very basic information about my birth parents. And I knew from that my birth father would be older with
Yeah.
where I was in life at that point in time. I thought he would like be in his 70s or something. And I just started thinking, it's not really important to me right now to find them, but it might be someday and it might be too late. So I had the means to do it, so let me do it now. And so much like what happened in Adoptable, and I know things have changed a lot since then, but back then, what I had to do is I had to petition the juvenile courts in Denver, which is where I was born, and say that for mental health reasons and medical history, I want to find my birth parents. They then assign my case to this intermediary who's a complete stranger who's allowed access to all my records because we're not, adoptees are not allowed access to their original birth certificate or any of their information from the adoption process until they get approval from the birth parents as well.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, so I had to hire this woman who Sharon Gless plays the character based on her in Adoptable, and she was very much like us. She sounded like she was out of Fargo. She was super chatty, and she was so into like the soap opera and the drama. She loved like all the details she was finding out, and she was highly inappropriate with some of the information she was giving me along the way as we went through the search process, including the fact that I had almost been aborted. But and I was like a little stunning to learn that. So it was a very weird and uncomfortable process to go through. But after about, I guess it was a little over 2 years, she finally found them. And had been challenging because my birth father had put a lot of misleading information
I'm okay.
into the original forms because he didn't want them to be found.
Yeah.
And so when they were finally found, and I got their information and I got their phone number and found out they lived outside Atlanta, that they were together still, which was is very rare,
Yeah.
and that they were apostolic Pentecostals, which is also very different and okay. So the first phone call I had, I was very nervous, and I waited until my birthday because I got the information about 3 or 4 days before my birthday, and I thought, oh, let me wait and call them on my birthday. So, and their first response when they had been contacted by the intermediary, they said no, they didn't want contact. So she was able to talk them into it. So I was already like, they're not into this. How is this going to go? We'll see what happens. But when I called and my birth mother got on the phone first, and the scene pretty much plays out in Adoptable, where she kind of said hello and who's this, and I told her who it was, and uh, I said, is now an okay time to talk? She said, yeah, sure. I said, I thought I'd wait until today to call you, and she said, oh, well, why is that? Why did you wait? And I said, well, because it's my birthday. And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You have to understand. I really had to convince myself that you had died, so I'd forgotten all that stuff." And
Hmm.
I kind of said, "Oh," and she said, "Oh, but I'm very happy you've been resurrected." And I said, "Okay." And we laughed, and we were good since then. And so it's been, very, very grounding. When I went down a few months later and met them in person, and there is something chemical to hug
Yeah.
your parents for the first time. I was about 30 years old, 31 years old at the time. And it's been great since then. And my birth father passed away about 4 years after I found him. He was actually much older than he had listed on the original records, but I still talk to my birth mother. She's still going strong, 92, and still drives herself, still teaches Bible study classes, a couple times a week. And it's been a really wonderful grounding experience. I feel very, very fortunate.
That's really fantastic. I'm so glad that worked out for you. Uh,
Thank you.
so let's talk about your advocacy work. So you sit on the board of the Tyler Clementi Foundation. For people who don't know, Tyler unfortunately died by suicide at 18. And what that's cyberbullying due to sexual orientation. But how did you want to get involved in this particular organization, and what do you want to share with others based off of Tyler's experience as a young gay guy?
Yeah, thanks, Abram. Yeah, I wanted to get involved. I'll have to say, I've been involved with some other charitable organizations through the year, and especially through Queer as Folk. It gave us such a platform to support the queer community out of, and so I've helped out GLAD over the years, HRC, the Trevor Project, Matthew Shepard Foundation. I've always opened myself up to help and speak out and do whatever I can. And back in 2000, during the pandemic, the Clementi Foundation, for their annual gala, wanted to honor the cast of Queer as Folk with what they call their Upstander Legacy Award. And so we had to do that virtually. And as has been the case for the past 25 years, whenever it comes to bringing the cast together or getting the cast to do things, whether it's personally for us just having a poker game when everyone's in town, or for events like this, I have just ended up being the cruise director. Everyone comes to me. I somehow have some magic touch to be able to get everybody together and organize things. So even though they'd originally contacted Michelle Clooney, because Michelle Clooney knew Jane Clementi, who was Tyler's mother,
Uh,
Michelle called me up and said, like, would you handle this for me? I don't know how to do all this. So I ended up doing all the wrangling and the arranging and helping the Clementi Foundation put the event together. And I think because of that and the passion they saw that I had around things, they asked me to join the board. I think they were looking for younger, newer members, and especially people with more of a public profile who might be able to help them out. So I had to think about it, but I felt very strongly about the mission of the foundation to end bullying online and off, and especially for LGBTQ kids, but also for grown-ups as well too. I've been bullied from the time I was a kid, and I've been bullied as a grown-up as well too. I think a lot of us has been through these things, and I think we're living in a time now where bullying has become the norm, especially online. The anonymity that being behind a screen or typing into your phone gives you this sense of power that you can say the most awful things and most hurtful things about people. And so the work we're trying to do is to end that by nipping the bud at the root, right? And going back and working with kids back in school, not only the bullied, but those who might turn into bullies themselves, because a lot of that has to do with self-esteem. So, what can we do to help those that might be tempted to become a bully to not do that? And then, how can we empower kids and grown-ups to be what we call upstanders, not just a bystander who stands by when someone's being bullied, but being an upstander to do something to help stop that or prevent it while it's going on. So it's a really important work we're doing. It's one that is a struggle, to be quite honest,
Mhm.
given that we have one of the biggest bullies of history is now running our country. And how do you combat that
Yeah.
when that is being rewarded and shown as normalized behavior by the most powerful leader in the world? How do you convince kids that that's not the path to go down? So that's what we continue to do. We're working on finalizing developing a really wonderful app that will give a lot of tools for parents and kids and teachers to use to help combat this. We're trying to get into schools to work more with students. And, you know, Jane Clementi, Tyler's mother, just being a beacon of hope as she is to take the greatest tragedy a mother could ever go through in her life and turn it into this positive messaging that she's done over the past decade or more is really inspiring. So I'm hoping we can have even bigger impact as we continue. But if you want to go to tylerclementi.org for any of you out there listening, and we can always use especially financial support, but also see what's going on in schools around you. We have programs going on all throughout the country, and you know, help us, join us, be an upstander.
Nice. Wonderful. Um, so last question for you as we close out is when you look at your career as a whole, from the time you started until now, have you told the stories you wanted to tell and have you become the artist you've always wanted to be?
Never. No, not yet. Not yet. Let's keep
No.
going.
Yeah.
No, I think there's so many more stories to tell, and no, I'm not satisfied with where I'm at. I think if I was satisfied, that would get really boring. So no, I want to be better. I want to do more and reach more people. No, I think there's always stories to tell. As long as they'll let me keep doing it, I'm going to keep doing it.
Okay, wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
this has been fantastic. I was so happy when I initially met you. I was like, I know his face, and I thought about it. I was like, oh, where's Will? So I had to jump at the opportunity to speak with you. But I'm so glad that you took the time to sit down and speak and share your story and your experience and your career. This has been one of the greatest conversations I've had with someone doing this work. So I really appreciate it. And I just look forward to following the rest of your journey and seeing what else you have coming up. And yeah, we're pretty excited. You're like one of my new favorite people.
Oh, thanks, Ava. And you are too. I really am very grateful. And that's the wonderful thing about life, right? You never know who you're going to meet in a car or in a station or anywhere else, and what's going to come and grow out of that. So I'm grateful for you and the work you're doing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will hope to see you again in person and continue the conversation.
Yeah, and best of luck with all your endeavors.
Thank you. Same to you. All right. Bye.
Bye.